retro gaming can be a little bit overwhelming with so much choice and so many different games to go for. So what console do you go for first if you're starting off your retro collection? Well, I think it should be the Dreamcast. Now, let me tell you a few reasons why. Am I an authority on this? Not really, but I do have lots of retro collections, as you can see, and the Sega Dreamcast is still my most favourite console of all of them. And there's a few really good reasons why I think it's a really good console to have in your collection. For a start, so many great games on it. There are a lot of games that are crossovers on the PlayStation and Xbox, so there's plenty of games to choose from, not just exclusive ones, but also lots of other ones from different consoles. Graphics wise, it's definitely one of the best consoles from that generation. It completely steamrolls the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox original. It looks amazing. There's so many different games that actually run better on the Dreamcast. For example, I talk about Rayman 2 quite a lot. I love that game. It's such a lovely little platform, but it runs the best on the Dreamcast. It looks absolutely beautiful. The colours are amazing. Graphically, just looks so much better, and it runs really smoothly too. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to choose a Dreamcast version of a game over a PlayStation 2 one, for example. In terms of the console and the features itself, it's a pretty lightweight console. It doesn't take up a lot of space. As you can see from the Xbox original, it's pretty massive and it's a bit of a block, but the Dreamcast is a nice sort of case. You can change the case as well. There are different ones that you can get. There's some different colours. There's a black one, a white one, and you can also get see-through shells as well. You can get them quite cheaply on Amazon or eBay, for example. They're not necessarily official ones, but who cares about that? But yeah, there's lots of things you can do to customise it if you don't like the original grey colour. It also does have the 4 ports for the controllers as well, so you can play up to 4 players. I've not actually done that yet, but it's definitely one if you want to play co-op with people as well. In terms of the controller, the Dreamcast controller is one of my favourite controllers. I just love how it looks. I think it looks really cool. I love the VMU screen that it has. I'll show you some clips in a minute, but basically you can play different mini games on it. It has its own battery in there, and when you're playing on different games, you often get like a little screen there that has different characters on it. For example, a lot of fighting games, when you're playing, it shows up the different characters that you're playing with on screen, and it kind of also reacts to the different moves that you're doing as well, which I think is such a lovely little feature of the Dreamcast. Okay, maybe it's a little bit of a gimmick, but you know, I will take that gimmick. I think it's really, really cool. So in the back here, you've got your VMU and you've got your battery pack and your memory card pack. You just slot them in. It feels a bit clunky. There's not many controllers that have that, but I think it's really cool and also makes changing your memory cards really easy as well. On the back, you've got the triggers. They're really nice and responsive. They're much more responsive than some other consoles of this era. They're really nice. The only thing that I would say is a minus about the Dreamcast is that it only has the one joystick, so some games is a little bit clunky, especially when they've been made for the PlayStation that's obviously got the 2 joysticks. Basically, it means the camera control sometimes can be a little bit funky. For example, on Rayman 2, like I mentioned earlier, it should have the 2 sticks, but it doesn't on the Dreamcast, so instead they've compromised and used one of the buttons for that instead. It works fine. It's not as nice as being able to control the camera fully with a stick, but it is what it is. Sometimes you have to lose a little bit with different consoles. But yeah, in terms of the controller, I really like it. It's not too weighty, but also not too flimsy. And I think it's just a really cool looking controller as well. So one really big thing that I love about the Dreamcast is there are still indie game companies that are making games for it. So because it's such an easy one to code, you basically just burn a disc and it reads the disc. So because of that, there are quite a lot of studios that are producing games on the Dreamcast. Now, some of these are indie games that have been ported to the Dreamcast, and others are ones that are being re-released. So for example, some older games that maybe weren't released here, maybe some arcade ports. And I think that's really awesome because it just helps to make gaming a lot more accessible. So one of the things that I really like about it is that you get to play indie game, and you get to see it on the console, but it's got modern graphics, and yeah, it just looks really awesome. So that's something that I really like. One studio I particularly recommend is Wave Game Studios. Now, they very kindly send me quite a few of their games, and all of them are really cool. There's all these different ones. So for example, I've got Xenocider, which is kind of like a rail shooter. It's very, very hard, but yeah, it's a really awesome kind of 80s, 90s style shooter. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Space Harrier with the way that the graphics look, but yeah, it's more of a shooting one, but it's really, really cool. Got Shadow Gangs, which is a platformer. It kind of has a lot of ninja style fighting in there. Very, very cool. Again, very difficult. I haven't got very far in it, but basically it's Freddie Mercury, which I think is amazing. So that's another one that I've got. Rush Rush Rally Reloaded, which is a kind of top-down racer. Reminds me a lot of Micro Machines, but not necessarily based on toys. It's a lot more adult themed, I think. You can run people over it and get scores for it. But yeah, it's really fun. It's kind of a bit like Grand Theft Auto, but racing. So yeah, that's another really fun one to have. This one's a very interesting one. This has been banned in a few countries, which is Postal. Obviously very ultra violent, but it's a very fun game. It doesn't really look that violent compared to other modern games now, to be honest anyway. But yeah, it's a really interesting one and very important part of video game history, I think. Some modern ones that are indie games for the Dreamcast is Flea. Now this is, again, a very difficult platformer, but it's a kind of pixel style one. Very fun. It's a very simple gameplay, but yeah, you're bound to have a lot of fun with it if you enjoy challenging platformers. And another one I've got is Alice Dreams Tournaments. Now it's very difficult to explain what this game is. It's basically a kind of couch co-op game, but you do all these kind of battle royale style things, and there's various different things that you have to reveal from other players. I'm explaining it really badly, but essentially it's a co-op game and it's really interesting. It's kind of like a battling game. Yeah, it's worth a shot, especially if you want one that is a co-op. One of my favourites of their releases is Intrepidity. Now this is an awesome little platformer. It's not too difficult from what I've seen so far. Not so pixely compared to the other ones, but it's got some really interesting levels and character designs. And then you also have a home hub where you have your own home, and you can even play some arcade games in your own home, which I think is a really sweet touch. Yeah, it's a really awesome little game. Definitely recommend this one. But yeah, all of them are really amazing too. So definitely check out Wave Game Studios. They're not the only ones that are doing it though. There are quite a lot of other indie game developers. I think Super Rare Games and Limited Run are sometimes doing Dreamcast games. They do other consoles as well, like the NES, SNES and the Mega Drive as well. So definitely keep an eye out, because I think being able to play new games on the Dreamcast is a really, really amazing thing about the Dreamcast. Now, a console isn't really made without the games. So what games do I recommend for it? Well, there's loads of games that are really amazing. There's probably a few that I've not picked up yet that I'm definitely going to at some point, but I'll just share with you a few games that I really like to play. A few exclusives that I think you really need to have part in your collection. Jet Set Radio, really fun skateboarding graffiti style game. Basically you rollerblade around and you graffiti up different walls. Now you have a time period that you have to do this in. It gets very, very challenging. You have to make sure you pick up enough paint to do the graffiti, but you are also always chased around by various cops and police and whatever, and it gets very stressful at times. So that's definitely a really interesting feature of the game. It's very simple, but there's different characters that you can choose from, and visually it's just a really super cool game. It's kind of a self-shaded, bright colours, and yeah, kind of like a very cartoony. It looks very cartoony, like a 90s cartoon. It's really, really awesome. Like I said, it can be pretty challenging, and occasionally the camera is a bit frustrating. That's probably my main criticism of the game. That sometimes can be really awkward, but that kind of is a given with a lot of retro games anyway. Sometimes the camera angles are really awkward with 3D games. But yeah, definitely get this one. It is a classic. Another one, now the Dreamcast is really good for fighting games, as are a lot of other Sega consoles, but the Dreamcast is probably one of my favourite. It has the most fighting games that I really enjoy. Virtua Fighter, absolute classic. I love the Virtua Fighter games. They look really good. They have a lot of really interesting mechanics in it. Feels a bit more realistic than some other fighting games. Obviously, that's one of the points of the games. It tries to keep it a bit more grounded in reality, unlike other games like Soul Calibur, for example. But it's a really awesome game, definitely a good fighting game. Really fun to play with friends as well. And speaking of fighter games, another really awesome one is Power Stone. Now, Power Stone is really unique. It has a really interesting art style, but it's also more of like a top-down diagonal style instead of a side view, which you're normally used to with fighting games. Basically, you have various different characters and you battle against all the different characters, but you are in a room, so you're in like a square room, and you basically have to pick up all these different stones, and then that gives you your big power attack, and that basically is how you really win the game. If you let your enemy pick up all the stones before you, it's kind of game over for you unless you're really good at the game. And yeah, all the different fighting abilities for all the different characters, they have some really fun abilities, and yeah, they're just really fun to play with. I love the look of the game. I think all the character styles are really fun. Again, more cartoony than 3D, but it is the 3D game. But yeah, it's just really awesome. It's one of my favourite fighting games, and hopefully I'll be getting Power Stone 2 at some point, but it is a bit more expensive. It's currently coming in about £45–50, so yeah, they are a little bit pricey, and that is one of the bad things about the Dreamcast, but we'll get to that later. If you're into racing games, MSR is a really great racing game. It's much more realistic, but yeah, it's a really solid racing game, a lot of fun. It's got lots of different modes that you can do. It's a really fun game. It looks really great for its age, and yeah, definitely worth getting. And this is a title that you can pick up really cheap as well, so it's worth having your collection, especially if you enjoy racing games. Now, of course, one of the biggest games on the console is Sonic Adventure. Now, this is obviously very well known for the Dreamcast, and it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of 3D Sonic games that don't really work well. This is probably one of the few that does work quite well. Again, it does have some very frustrating camera angles, and I think my main criticism of the game is sometimes it tries too hard to be a platformer, and it doesn't really work with how Sonic is, with how fast he is. You're supposed to just go through the levels and basically get through as quick as possible and do them very well, but sometimes the platforming part doesn't work too well. But I have really enjoyed this game. There are some frustrating levels that I've not been able to get past, but yeah, it's one of those things sometimes. But yeah, definitely a classic and can be picked up really cheap for the Dreamcast, so it's definitely one to have in your collection. So a game that I actually don't have on the Dreamcast, but I have played on a port for the PlayStation, is Shenmue. Now, Shenmue is obviously very famous. It's very well known for how detailed it is and how sort of entrenched the story is and how detailed it goes into all the different environments. It's a really great game. It's sometimes a little bit slow for some people, but I think that's one of the strengths of the game. It's really well done. It's obviously got real-time aspects in there as well. It's a really great game. I definitely recommend it. Probably prefer 2. I think the story is better in 2 and also the gameplay is better in it, but they're both really great games. You can pick them up a fairly okay price depending on which version you get, whether you get these sort of special edition ones or not. But I definitely recommend having them in your collection. It's an absolute classic, and it's one of the games that the Dreamcast is most famous for, so of course you should definitely get that and have that in your collection. With the exclusive games, the last one I will mention is Space Channel 5. Now, this is a really unusual game. It's so bonkers. Basically, you are a reporter and aliens are taking over your space station, and to battle them you have to repeat their actions in time, in rhythm with the music and in rhythm with what they do. So you have to have very good memory for this, but you also have to react exactly on time to how they do it. This makes it quite challenging. I've still only got to the second level because basically if you don't get a high enough viewership rating you can't get through to the next level. So it is very challenging, but it's so unique. You can pick it up pretty cheap still as well, and yeah, it's like visually it's really fun. It's like the 50s style space, what that was kind of envisaged as. Really cool music as well. And yeah, it's just a super fun game, and I can't really think of another game that's like it. Yeah, it's just really, really unique visually and gameplay wise as well. There's not many rhythm games on the Dreamcast that I'm aware of. So yeah, it's definitely one to have for your collection and to have a bit more variety in there as well. I almost forgot one more game that I forgot to mention is Mac and X. Now, this is a really unusual game. I don't think too many people talk about it, so I feel it's like fairly underrated. But basically, it's a kind of slasher style first person game. And yeah, it's really different. It's got such a weird story, very interesting visuals. It's pretty tricky, but yeah, once you get used to it, it's not too bad. Basically, you go around with your sort of mecha swords, and it's set in the future. It's very futuristic and very dystopian story. And yeah, it's just a really interesting game. You can still pick it up fairly cheap as well. And yeah, it's something that feels... It's a game that I don't think you've seen made again since. It's really unusual, like I said. I think you have to play it to understand why, but it's something that's worth having in your collection, as I'm 99% sure it's exclusive to the Dreamcast, so it's worth having in your collection just for that reason. So I have a few other game recommendations. Now, these aren't necessarily exclusive. Some of them are less well known. Some of them are better known games that are classics, but they are on the Dreamcast as well, and that's why I feel like they're worth mentioning. So, Tony Hawk's Skateboarding. Obviously, I don't need to say much about this game. Pretty much everyone loves Tony Hawk's games, especially the older ones. This is no exception. It's super fun on the Dreamcast to play as well. It looks really good. I've not done a direct comparison, so I can't tell you if it's any better or worse than on the PlayStation, but to my eyes, it looks really, really good. It plays really well and smoothly, and it's a classic, and it's pretty cheap on the Dreamcast. So if you don't have a PlayStation 2 and you want to get it, then you can definitely get it for the Dreamcast, and it won't cost you an arm and a leg. So that's that one. Another one of my favourite fighters is Soul Calibur. This works really, really well on the Dreamcast. It looks great as well. Very smooth. Visually, it's really good. I actually think Soul Calibur probably looks better than Virtua Fighters, graphic-wise. It looks really nice. It's a really fun fighter. You can go through and unlock different characters, and yeah, it's just got lots of fun. I really love the swords and all the different abilities that they have with that, and the kind of story behind it as well, that with every person that you defeat, it kind of strengthens your soul and stuff. And yeah, it's really cool. Love all the different environments as well. I love the fact that you can push people out of the arena. That's one of the fun things about it as well. So yeah, Soul Calibur, and it won't cost you an arm and a leg either. It's very cheap still for the Dreamcast. Now, I've already mentioned Rayman 2, but here it is. Now, again, not very expensive. You find a lot of the ones that are across different consoles aren't that pricey compared to the exclusive games. It's really good. It looks really, really amazing. It's quite different to the other versions of Rayman, and yeah, it just looks absolutely beautiful on the Dreamcast, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's such a great little platformer, isn't it? It's just so well done. I love how different all the levels are, and that they've all got different things that you have to complete, like going through water and trying to dodge things as you're being towed by a snake or whatever, to climbing up sort of swirls of air. It's just so much fun, and it's really, really charming. So yeah, definitely recommend getting it, especially if you've not played Rayman 2. A classic for Sega is Echo the Dolphin, of course. Now, if you don't know, Echo the Dolphin is a kind of side-scrolling platformer, but you're a dolphin and you are underwater. Now, you have different abilities. Basically, dolphins are kind of aliens in here, and you're kind of trying to save the world, which is very strange for a dolphin game, but it's very, very atmospheric. The music is beautiful. Can be quite a frustrating game, but I feel like this particular one, it's 3D and it's maybe not as frustrating as the other ones on the Mega Drive, which are much more 2D platformer style ones, but it's got quite a lot of puzzle elements in it that you have to work out, and I think it's really, really atmospheric, and it works really well 3D, which I wasn't sure if it would or not, but it just looks really, really good. I love the music in it. I feel quite relaxed when I play it and sort of look at it. So yeah, it's definitely one I recommend getting. It's a very unique game for Sega. A classic that is ported from the Saturn, I believe, and from the arcade games is Sega Rally. Now, Sega Rally, obviously I don't have to say much about it. I think everyone knows what it is. It's a rally racing game. You only have 3 or 4 tracks, I think, but they are very difficult. You have to complete them within the time frame. So it's not a very long game, but it does have a lot of playability just in the fact that it is very difficult. So it does really force you to get very, very good at it. It's very unforgiving about any mistakes that you make. Any mistakes you make, basically you can't complete the game. But yeah, it's a really fun game. It looks really, really good on the Dreamcast. You can do different views, so you can do first person or you can do third person with the car. It looks really great. Definitely much better than the Saturn as well. Runs very smoothly as well. And again, not a very expensive game. I think this one only cost me £12, so definitely worth getting for the Dreamcast. A couple of games that I'd never really heard of until I saw them in the shop, but very glad that I bought them. First one is Slave Zero. Now basically you play as a giant robot and you go around this city and you basically have to defeat these enemies. It's a kind of save the day style game. It's a little bit cyberpunky, very, very mecha futuristic style. It's really interesting. It's essentially just a shooter game, but I think it's really fun, and yeah, I'd never heard of it before. I've not really heard anyone talk about it much either, and yeah, it didn't really cost me much at all. I think it was only £10, so absolute bargain, and I've had quite a few hours of playing from this. Not too difficult either, so if that's a problem for you, I don't think you'll find this too frustrating. And yeah, the controls are really interesting and you get different abilities and different weapons, and yeah, definitely worth getting this one for the Dreamcast. Now, this game, 18 Wheeler, I played in an arcade and I really enjoyed it because I don't think there's many games like it. But essentially it's kind of like your typical arcade racer. You're under a timer and you have to get to the different checkpoints on time. So yeah, it's not anything groundbreaking, but I really like the different trucks that you can have. You've got different characters, different trucks, and all the different courses are really interesting. There's lots of different pickups you can get, and yeah, there's lots of really fun different effects that it has, and yeah, I think it's really cool. I've had quite a few fun hours playing this game and something pretty unique, and yeah, I just enjoy it. I think it's a really cool game. If you've played it in an arcade, then you'll know what it is. It's pretty much an arcade port, but worth having at home, and again, not very expensive, so worth having. Now, I've talked about all the really good things about why you should get a Dreamcast. Now here are a few things that I think are maybe not so good about the Dreamcast, or that you maybe need to keep in mind when getting one. The first one being the price point is pretty steep. The console's getting more and more expensive now. Obviously consoles break, and so, you know, the price goes up more, but also the games are very pricey compared to PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Not all of the games are really expensive, but they're definitely more expensive than their PlayStation 2 counterparts if it's on that platform as well, and the exclusives are very, very pricey. For example, Skies of Arcadia, which I don't think is necessarily an exclusive. I think it's got a GameCube counterpart, but it is only on the GameCube and the Dreamcast. That is very, very expensive. It's like £70 to £90 for a nice version of it. So yeah, some of the exclusives are very expensive, and that's something to keep in mind, especially if you really care about the quality. The cases break very easily, so sometimes it's really hard to find a case in good condition. And yeah, some of them are quite rare. Sometimes the Japanese versions are cheaper, but the Western versions are really expensive, so that's something that can be quite frustrating about the Dreamcast. But if you go into it knowing that, then you'll be okay. Like I said, most of the games are not too bad. It's mainly the exclusive ones that are really pricey. Another thing to keep in mind with the Dreamcast is it has a battery inside of the console. Now this battery will probably most likely be flat when you buy the Dreamcast, and unfortunately the battery is soldered in. So if you need to replace the battery, it's not too much of a problem. It doesn't really affect gameplay at all. But the most annoying thing of not having the battery working is that every time you open your Dreamcast, it will ask you to input the date again because it's got no battery to remember what the date is. And it's really annoying. It's not in any way console breaking at all, but if you do want to replace the battery, you do unfortunately have to solder it in, so that's something to keep in mind for that as well. In general, on top of the pricey games, the other problem is the Dreamcast just isn't as available as other consoles. So for example, any old second-hand game shop you go to, you will find a huge collection of PlayStation 2 games. Unfortunately, a lot of them won't have many, if any, Dreamcast games. And every time I see a Dreamcast game in a shop, I get very excited about it because you just don't always see it. I think especially in the UK, it just was not as popular. Maybe other countries it's more popular, like the States States, or like I said, in Japan it was massive, but in the UK it's really, really hard to find Dreamcast games physically. So if you're a bit like me and you like buying your games in physical stores and you like supporting your local stores but also enjoy finding the games in the store, then that is something to keep in mind. They're not super easy to find, but you will find them all over the place on eBay and other secondhand stores that you can buy from. So it's not too much of a problem, but it is something to keep in mind. I hope I've convinced you to get a Dreamcast. If I haven't, let me know why, but I hope you do enjoy it. And the Dreamcast, like I said, is such an amazing console. It's one of the few retro consoles that I really do keep coming back to time and time again and still find it a real joy to play on it. So it is one of those consoles that I think will have a very special place in your heart. But that concludes the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well if you want to see more videos like this. And you can follow me on social media as well. I'll leave all the links down below if you want to keep up to date with anything that's coming out. But in the meantime, have a good one. I'll see you soon. Bye.